Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 7 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Carol, we are so fortunate, I feel like, here at Bloomberg. We get to speak to so many really smart and experienced investors that have managed, billions of dollars of assets on behalf of their clients and have seen everything. They've seen different cycles, different sector moves. Our next guest is right at the top of that list, Kara Murphy, CIO of Kestra Investment Management. I don't know what Kestra Investment Management is, but she's worked all over Wall Street her entire career. It's just amazing we get to speak to some of these people. So Kara, thanks again for joining us here. I mean, Kara and I have been talking about today, we got that retail sales number today. I'm not sure the Fed needs to do anything, and I think I'm okay if they don't do anything in November. How are you viewing this economy and this market right here?
I think you're right to be really marveling at these strong retail sales numbers. Earlier this year when we were looking at not nominal retail sales, but real retail sales, there was a concern because those had turned negative for a little while. But over the last few months, we have seen a very definitive turn in both nominal and real retail sales to going positive. And it's a bit of a head scratcher because when we look at the consumer confidence numbers, they continue to be in recessionary territory. But when we look at what consumers are doing with their actual dollars, they're out there spending like the economy is doing really, really well. So I think the Fed should feel pretty comfortable about that. And I don't think that the house is on fire and the Fed needs to come in with a bunch of rate cuts. I think they'll continue cutting rates, but they can take their time.
Hey, Kara, you guys work with independent financial advisors. You're giving them some advice, you're giving them guidance. And I'm just curious, what is it that they are most concerned about right now in this environment?
Everybody's talking about the election. So for the next couple of weeks, it's going to be really hard to focus on anything else. And so a lot of what we're doing is trying to hold hands and tell people that we don't think that whoever ends up in the White House is going to have a big impact on the medium trajectory of the market. So you need to kind of sit through this near-term volatility. But then coming out of that, just a couple of weeks from now, hopefully, cross fingers, I think the focus will then return to earnings, which is really going to be the driver of the market. And there too, I think we're seeing pretty good trends.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to go there. I mean, we just had some of the big banks report. I mean, now we've got the rest of the S&P to come over the next couple of weeks, but the bank earnings, Karen and I were talking at the opening here this morning, they look pretty solid across the board.
Quite solid. And again, if we have the Fed continuing to cut at a modest rate, a more normal yield curve, activity is picking up in a lot of their core areas. Credit's okay. So they have a lot of things to be really positive about. And then when you look in particular at some of those small cap banks, they're the ones who are particularly interest rate sensitive and will start to benefit from this new interest rate environment.
Hey, Kara, one of the things too, Paul and I were, as we were gearing up for you to join us, your background is just way cool. You've worked at a lot of well-known firms, whether it's Goldman Sachs, whether it was AIG funds. But what's interesting is you go kind of way back. Before you tapped into the investment industry, you were an analyst covering international political and economic risk, and you focused on Eastern Europe and Russia. One of the things that Paul brought up, which I thought was really brilliant, is that this idea that we have another headline that Israel's saying a Hamas chief may have been killed in Gaza attacks, and yet the markets seem to take that in stride, or even if we see a blip, seems to recover quickly. What is going on in investment markets where geopolitical risk seems to be, they kind of just take it in and kind of don't seem to overreact? Investors don't.
It is quite remarkable. And you have to go deep into my resume to find that. But it's
We did.
I find international politics incredibly interesting, and these types of things that you're talking about are really, really important. But I don't talk about them all that often simply because U.S. markets over time have shown us again and again that they can remain very well insulated from geopolitical risk. And that's a great benefit from being in the United States, which has, an ocean on either side. And if you look back, in fact, to when Russia invaded Ukraine at the time, I mean, there was a lot of concern, war in Europe for the first time since World War II. concern about grains and other commodity prices, oil. And very quickly, within a couple weeks or months, that risk started to fade from markets. And we've seen the same in the Middle East. And usually the big way that these geopolitical risks sort of transition from wherever they start to US markets is through oil. And interestingly, over the last 12 months, we've seen oil come down, I think driven by some softer demand, particularly in China. But that transmission mechanism has not really reared its ugly head. And so US markets are able to really shrug it off.
Kara, how about the fixed income space? I can sit in a 2-year treasury and get 4% here. Is that okay, or should I be taking some credit risk, do you think?
So we actually think high quality credit is pretty attractive here. So you have nice nominal yields, spreads are narrow, but not terribly narrow. And we'd actually rather be in a corporate space and be leaning into credit risk as opposed to duration risk right here. Now, once you get out the credit curve into high yield, that's where I start to get a little bit more worried, simply because if the Fed rate cutting cycle takes a little bit longer than what the market's currently expecting, some of those companies are not going to get the relief that they're really hoping for, and credit spreads are about at historic lows. So you're not getting paid to take a lot of that risk. But if you're in that, sort of core credit, high quality borrowers, we think that's a really nice place to be.
All right, how about one of the things I want to ask you, given your great experience, is alternatives. How do you guys allocate to alternatives? I was recently talking to some retail investment advisors, and they put a lot of allocation to alternatives. How do you think about that?
So, alternatives can be a great addition to a diversified portfolio. I don't think you have to have alternatives to build wealth. And so we work with a lot of very high net worth clients who do really, really well over time with the simple stock bond strategy.
Seriously? I feel like every time I talk to a wealth manager, they are like, my clients want alts. They want different ways. They want to tap the private credit markets. They want that alpha. That's what they're asking about. So continue, because I'm just kind of blown away.
Yeah.
It seems like everybody says
so I would say some are, but once you start to get into the complexity and the sort of idiosyncrasies of some of those strategies, that's where it starts to become a little bit more tricky. And look, as we think about both credit and equity, because of, regulatory environment, a lot of different reasons, a fair amount of investment opportunities have been moved to those private markets. That said, there's a huge amount of complexity. There's, liquidity tie-ups, there's paperwork that you have to do. And again, a lot of idiosyncrasies where you have to work much harder to get a diversified alts portfolio. So we generally recommend keep it a small portion of your portfolio, keep it diversified by asset class and by manager, and that will protect you as you might get into rockier environments.
All right, Kara, thank you so much for joining us. Always appreciate getting a few minutes of your time. Kara Murphy, she's the CIO at Kestra Investment Management, getting her thoughts on these markets.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Or watch us live on YouTube.
Our next guest, he clearly has a view on this. Matt Sigel, he's head of digital assets research at Van Eck. Matt, what are the smart people in crypto talking about today? What are the next things that we need to be thinking about going forward with crypto?
Yeah, we have strong conviction that we're on the cusp of a high volatility rally in Bitcoin that would be a similar pattern to what happened around the 2020 election. So when you look at the volatility profile of FX, fixed income, equities, they're all at the high end of their range over the last year. Bitcoin stands out for trading at the low end of its volatility range. Now we're starting to see that change. And some of that is the market starting to price in the higher odds that Trump has in the election. And some of it is just sellers' exhaustion. We had a lot of large sellers over the summer. They've kind of wrapped up. So the backdrop is looking pretty strong. There's also not much leverage in the space right now. So that is something that could emerge with a bit more optimism.
Would you rather see a Trump White House versus a Harris White House based on maybe some of his comments on the crypto space?
100%. The current administration has spent 4 years attacking this industry in every agency.
How so? Is it Mr. Gensler at the SEC, or is it more than that?
Well, Biden put out an executive order in the first few months of his administration instructing all federal agencies to take a maximum enforcement approach towards this industry. So,
why do you think?
Because they want maximum control over the financial system, want to be able to track and see every transaction, and don't have a great respect for privacy would be my take on it.
I would counter why not, shouldn't they? Because Bitcoin was initially kind of set up to be the anti-establishment, right, in terms of the financial industry. And yet you guys all want to now play kind of with the traditional environment and investors. No, I you know what I mean? So shouldn't there be some oversight to protect investors?
Well, that's what the ETF wrapper did, and we've seen $20 billion of flows into these spot Bitcoin ETFs since their launch in January. And what we've
flows
noticed
don't necessarily mean, investors want to play with it, right?
Yeah. So what we've noticed is that the weekly inflows into these Bitcoin ETFs have been predictive of the next week's returns. So yes, institutions do want access to this asset. It's anti-dollar. It's a fixed, scarce asset with a predictable monetary policy, which is not what the Fed has been following. And we can see that hedge fund holdings of the Bitcoin ETFs were up 40% in Q2. The number of public companies that now own Bitcoin on their balance sheet, that number is also up 40% year over year. It's approaching
why would a
50 different companies.
So why would companies do? Is that why are they owning?
They want to make money. It's the best performing asset class of the last 15 years.
Most of them do it as a tiny slice, to be fair. Yes. Even in a portfolio, if somebody comes on, they say it's a tiny slice.
You mean the listed companies who are adding Bitcoin? For MicroStrategy, it's not a tiny slice. For Block, it's not a tiny slice. For Reddit, it's not a tiny slice. These are meaningful allocations. If you look at crypto's correlations over the last 10 years, the strongest correlation has been positive with money supply. So what did your last guest said? The Fed is cutting rates. Let's get out of short-term fixed instruments. Let's get into riskier assets. This is where Bitcoin has historically shined, is when money supply is accelerating and the dollar is weak. So what's the election likely to solidify? 4 more years of irresponsible money printing. I just saw that Moody's has put a number of countries on warning for sovereign downgrades. They're on the lookout for when a country's tax
You're talking
revenues,
about deficits and so on.
Yeah,
right?
deficits, right? So they're looking at scenarios where interest payments are more than 20% of federal revenues. In the U.S., it's 24% right now. So we think that the market will refocus on this fiscal unsustainability after the election, and that will turbocharge Bitcoin and crypto's performance.
At Van Eck, the flows coming into the crypto, who are those people? Is it retail, institutional? What are the fund flows that you guys see?
Yeah, so not all of the ETF holders need to report their positions. Okay. So what we have observed is that hedge funds have been the largest purchasers of the Bitcoin ETFs. RIAs have been smaller, but they are growing. And even some public pension plans like Wisconsin, Michigan, Jersey City. Nice. There you go.
You own it, Carol.
and I think one of the most striking things about Bitcoin this year...
Don't get me into Jersey City politics or their budget.
One of the most striking things this year has been the transformation in the mainstream media around Bitcoin's energy intensity. We've looked at some research analyzing the natural language models as how the media is treating Bitcoin. And really, that negativity has evaporated. There's been a lot of peer-reviewed research that's come out that has proven that Bitcoin can help incentivize the renewable build-out by acting as this economic battery. And it's been very encouraging to see that transformation. And because of that, Bitcoin and AI are now inextricably linked. Both require vast amounts of energy. Bitcoin miners are beginning to pivot and transition some of their electricity to serve the AI market. And those Bitcoin miners, the publicly traded ones that have pivoted, their stocks have massively outperformed. So we think there's going to be more of that convergence between Bitcoin and AI. And President Trump certainly understands that.
So Bitcoin companies now are just saying, wait a minute, I've got a new revenue stream. I'm helping out the AI guys who need access to data centers.
Yeah, the Bitcoin miners trade at about $4 million per megawatt of power that they control. The data center companies trade at $40 million per megawatt. So there is an enormous arbitrage. It takes a bit of CapEx to repurpose these facilities. You need redundant power. You need better fiber connections, more water. But once you do, the economics are highly compelling. And those are the stocks that are outperforming.
CRYP, CryptGo, gives you a launchpad monitor for all that crypto stuff. Bloomberg's got it. What else besides Bitcoin should I be focusing on in the crypto space?
Yeah, well, we like these smart contract platforms. These are the automated open source databases that act like an open source app store. So Solana and Ethereum would be among the most prominent. We've got regulators in the US and the EU suing all of big tech for monopoly. It's head scratching to me that the regulators don't incentivize growth in these open source app stores that can take margin away, provide competition to the closed walled garden app stores. So Ethereum, Solana, these also look quite strong to us.
Matt, maybe I'm just stupid. Like, I still try to understand Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, what will be their role longer term? And I kind of understand blockchain in terms of putting some important documents and so on and so forth. I think that can cut out a lot of middlemen and be efficient, and understanding ownership. But tell me, like, what is still, like, I don't go shopping with Bitcoin. I don't pay bills with Bitcoin.
Matt
I don't
Miller
transact.
tried to do that.
He tried, and he still tries, right?
Yes, he does.
But I
Bless his
don't,
soul.
right? And I understand we're going to get the emerging markets application, but it isn't widespread. So what is ultimately the end game with Bitcoin? And I ask that with pure respect of trying to understand where this goes.
At its heart, this is an emerging market asset class that provides an alternative to the U.S. monetary policy. And when we look at surveys around the world, the countries that are most optimistic about Bitcoin tend to be the youngest countries, Nigeria, the Philippines. The countries that are least optimistic about Bitcoin are the oldest countries, Germany, France. So we think of it as a way to get exposure to emerging markets in a 1% position, what it might take you a 5% position in an emerging markets fund to do. And meanwhile, that 5% position is 30% China. We're not seeing a lot of demand for that specific allocation from our clients.
Great chat.
Yep, awesome. Pretty much everything I know from crypto, I know from this guy. Matt Sigel, head of digital assets research at Van Eck. Of course, he's originally from Bloomberg. That's the highlight of his career. We appreciate him coming in and giving us some thoughts on the whole crypto space. It really is helpful.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 7 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
19 days?
19 days
to the election. David Gura, you do the podcast thing. I don't know. What do we do in 19 days?
The Big Take podcast.
Thank you. The Big Take podcast. If you're either candidate, what do you do with 19 days left, I guess?
I've got a piece of paper at my desk just noting where each of these candidates is over the next few days, and it's hard to keep track of because they are traveling a ton. But I think what we've seen in the last couple of days is them trying to reach out to this very small sliver of the population that remains undecided. So you had former President Trump going to Miami to do this town hall with Univision. You had Vice President Harris sitting down in Pennsylvania with Bret Baier of Fox News. I think that her goal for that interview was to reach Republican women voters. And as I watched that interview unfold, it was interesting. There were no questions about reproductive rights, no questions about abortion. That's really what the Harris campaign has kind of been focusing on, to try to get some of those women to support her campaign. Didn't come up over the course of that interview. When
it comes to 17 days, I mean, what do voters want to hear? And I'm just curious what really sways them and makes them either change their mind or decide to kind of, get up and actually vote.
It's interesting. I'd like to hope that it has to do with policy. And I think that if you look at the conversation that our colleague John Micklethwait had with former President Trump earlier this week, that was a very kind of policy-heavy conversation. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that that's going to sway voters at this point, and I'm as flummoxed as anyone, I think, by those who have been living through this campaign that has gone on for so long and still haven't made up their minds about who they're gonna support.
Not so long though for Kamala
That's
Harris,
very
and
true.
I wonder if that's a disadvantage or advantage. I feel like there's some debate on that.
It's a great question, and I think going back to that Fox News interview, I think there are a lot of people who haven't been exposed to her a ton, don't know what she stands for, still have questions about her platform and her background, and I think. Yes, there was that effort to reach out to those voters kind of on certain issues, but I think it was also just a moment for her to introduce herself to people who might not hear from her outside of sound bites on that network in particular.
And David, I guess what I hear from a lot of the political pros is it's really going to be a story about turnout. And I guess how are both sides thinking about turnout? Is a higher turnout an advantage for one versus the other?
We know a lot more about the ground game that the Harris campaign has constructed. And of course, I think one of the more astonishing and interesting things about that transition that took place in July is that Kamala Harris inherited the campaign almost wholesale from President Biden, the staff, the whole apparatus. And so we know that they've raised an incredible amount of money, $1 billion, and they're deploying that on advertising, digital and TV advertising, traditional advertising, but also on the ground game as well. So in the memos that the campaign management puts out, they emphasize a lot how many volunteers, how much staff they have across the country, particularly in those swing states. We know less about the Trump campaign, but Trump campaign's raised a lot of money as well, has a lot of support from PACs. Elon Musk has set up camp in Pennsylvania. So they're less clear about sort of how they're deploying that money, but I think you're right, Paul, that the ground game is crucial here and both candidates understand that.
Hey, there's early voting, though, David, already in several states. And I'm just curious, I've been hearing, I feel like it sounds like a lot of early voting happening, and I'm not sure what that is as an indicator.
You know, I think it's a sign that people are engaged and that every vote is going to count, and no candidate is taking votes for granted in either of these places. I think, as I'm from North Carolina and have been following sort of what's been going on there with the fallout from the hurricane that hit that state.
Will people be able to vote?
They will be able to vote, and you saw changes made both by the state election board and by the legislature as well to make it so that you could pick up your ballot in one place, deposit it in another. So I think that officials in that state and Florida as well, almost to the same extent, recognize the fact that this is something that's really front of mind to a lot of people, and they don't want to make people have to be unable to vote, obviously, or have difficulty voting. They're trying to make it more possible for them. I think in Florida, the hitch is there was a push for Governor Ron DeSantis to extend how late you could register to vote. He hasn't budged on that. In North Carolina, there has been some flexibility there.
October, is there anything that could move this needle here one way or the other, do you think? October surprises, I'm not sure. We've had hurricanes and all kinds, so I'm not sure what that is.
I think barring that, going back to that Fox News interview, there has been some speculation, could there be another debate? It's getting now pretty close to the election date, and it seems like that's not going to happen.
That's still theoretically on the table?
Could be. It's possible. They could pull together. I think that the betting odds have gotten reduced over these last few days.
That would be must-see TV, as they used to say.
Yeah. But barring that, I think we're going to see a few more moments like the one that we saw last night. Not exactly Friends. Exactly. I think that we'll see a few more moments like we saw last night. That is, each candidate kind of doing maybe more town hall with just themselves and a news anchor, or doing a sit-down interview. I think if you look at the way that the Harris campaign has pivoted over these last few weeks, they went from taking a lot of flack for not doing interviews to doing a ton of them, and really the gamut of them. So it started out with these kind of friendlier sit-downs, appearance on late night shows. Now Kamala Harris sitting down with this kind of very kind of adversarial network where she's had a lot of trouble. I think it's harder for the Trump campaign to kind of make the argument that she hasn't approached the media or done these kind of serious interviews.
On the Bloomberg, you can pull up all the different polling and stuff. It kind of is mind-blowing. I know we've all learned lessons about polls aren't always correct. So how do you read it? It looks like a very close race. I'm looking at one poll, general election, Kamala Harris 49.3, Donald Trump 47.7. But there's another poll that will show the opposite.
Exactly.
So is there a smart thought about that, too?
I think it's to kind of look at the polls broadly. So you bring up a few of them, you bring up these averages. We're being inundated with them, and there'll be a new Bloomberg Morning Consult poll before long as well. I think what it gives us is kind of an insight into what's happening at a more granular level, at a state level. I think back on the last Bloomberg poll that we did, and we kind of saw movement at the state level in those swing states. Also highlights sort of what the issues are that matter to voters. So I said at the top, Kamala Harris wasn't able to speak much about reproductive rights. She did talk a lot about immigration, and the way that Bret Baier set that up at the top of that interview is to say, look, you look at all of these polls that you mentioned, economy's at the top, immigration's right below it. So I think that there hasn't been a whole lot of movement in that. I think that that's kind of what voters have coalesced around. Those are the things that matter for them. But again, as I look at the polling, I'm looking for, again, averages, and I'm looking for sort of what stands out in terms of topics, or sort of how each candidate might be seeing some movement in terms of how voters perceive they're able to do on those particular issues.
Still close then?
Incredibly close.
Okay.
And it will be. And just to be candid, planning for what election night's going to be like. I think all of us are building in some flexibility, shall we say, into sort of how long it takes to get results and sort of what comes after that. And I'll just put a quick plug in for the podcast today. my colleague Saleha Mohsen, who's based in D.C., is doing an episode sort of on all of the litigation that we've seen since the 2020 election and sort of what that portends for this, the fact that the courts are likely to be busy, I think, depending on how this election turns out.
Oh, wait, so the lawyers win again.
They win again. They always win.
You want to know a winner in all of this.
We're breaking no news here, but yes, the lawyers always win.
All right, David, you're going to be co-hosting Surveillance
tomorrow.
Somebody whispered in my ear.
Yes, with you?
Yes.
I'll be
Where
here.
am I going to be? Yeah, absolutely. That'll be good. David Gura, he is the host of the Big Take podcast for Bloomberg News. He's just following up on all things on this race here. And again, the presidential race, the down ballot impacts here. Where does Congress go? It's going to be a fascinating issue. And again, as David was suggesting, Carol, I don't think we're going to know it 9 or 10 o'clock.
Remember that last
night.
time around, whoa, right? And it dragged on for a little while. But yeah, I think that's the new world order.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 7 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.
I still read the newspapers. The Journal and the Times. I've been doing it since 1986. I'm not going to stop. That's the way I start every day.
Do you still really read?
Yeah, every day.
That's really cool.
It's the Journal
Do you
and the
have an
Times.
app? Yeah,
I do.
Okay.
I'm actually digital now.
Yes,
so
he's not on the
I don't have the
actual
ink on the hands that you have to wash off when you get into the office. So to go. Lisa Mateo, what do you got for us today?
All right, Financial Times. Okay, you talked about him. Okay, this was in the Financial Times. Another perk to Ozempic, similar products, GLP-1s. A study shows that it cuts opioid alcohol abuse by up to half. Now, this was published in the journal Addiction. So they took an analysis of more than 500,000 people with a history of opioid use disorder, and it showed that more than 8,000 who were separately prescribed GLP-1 drugs had a 40% lower rate of opioid overdose than those who did not. So it's kind of showing this other side. You've been hearing about these different perks that GLP-1s can do, but this is another side to it because you have the opioid epidemic, and now this adds to it.
This is so cool. It has to do with the brain's reward system, right? And you're wondering it's triggering off something.
Correct.
I feel like every time we talk with our Madison Muller who covers it, this is the drug that is going to solve everything that ails us. It's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable. I have some firsthand experience with these GLP-1s.
Yeah.
Man, they work.
Yeah.
I mean,
I've seen it too.
But the nausea is unbelievable. Once they figure out to get rid of the nausea side effect, this thing is going to, and put it in an oral thing where you just take the pill. This thing's going to be, everybody's going to be doing it, I think. Crazy stuff.
And then you add this to it? My
Yep,
gosh,
exactly.
It's going to explode.
All right, what else?
All right, so do you feel like your body takes a little bit longer to bounce back?
Yes.
Okay, there's a scientific reason behind this. It's called biological resilience. Okay, this is what it's called. But this was in the Wall Street Journal, so it basically shows different things: parenting, work, changes in exercise habits, menopause. All of these stuff add up a lot of stress on your body, and as you get older, it gets worse. You lose muscle mass while you age, so you have a greater risk of injury. Like all of these different things. So what they say you're supposed to do is eat fewer calories to maintain weight, but they also say as you have more medication, side effects affects you more. But they pointed out something. They said at 2 ages, this was another thing, between 44 and 60, those 2 marks were like the ones that hit you the hardest. So
The one that hit me the hardest literally was on my birthday when I turned 60.
So that was the one.
You're
That was
60?
Yeah. And
Wow.
my
You
knees,
look
I'm
really,
like, and my
okay,
knees
can
were
I
like,
say this? You look really good.
Yeah.
But my
For
knees,
60.
I'm like, go to my doctor. And he's like, dude, you're just old, man. It's the knees. It's arthritis in your knees. I'm like, no way am I have arthritis. But are we arms or...
Today's
what are we doing
leg
today?
day. Today's leg day,
Okay,
yes.
just want to make sure. We have
Listen,
to...
I listen to you guys all the time. You are unbelievable.
Yeah, she is. She's a beast.
But it's harder. They even say, you know how you used to wake up when you were younger after a night of drinking and and you just bounce back. They say the reason you can't bounce back that much now is because your body's more dehydrated. It dehydrates faster as you get older. We can't win.
I just think, I just think what the telltale sign is as you move and you make those noises
You wake up, it's
you
like
didn't do that when you were younger.
Crack the neck. Okay, Chick-fil-A looking for a big plan for chicken domination in Asia. They
never
want
get
to
Chick-fil-A.
move. You've never gotten it?
No, I don't get the
Oh,
excitement.
the whole
The only time I
idea
get
behind it.
Chick-fil-A is when
But go ahead,
Matt
sorry.
Miller brings it in. Like he'll go when he was back before
It's
he
down
was
the block.
Yeah, and he would bring it for everybody. So Yes.
All
But
right,
it is. No,
Anchors
it's
the show,
moving. It's
exactly.
moving. Plans to open in Singapore late 2025. It's this 10-year-long, $75 million investment into Singapore. But they also, what they're doing too, is they're pending an application to be the island's first independent Chick-fil-A franchise owner. So that's a separate thing too. But there's other people out there. There's other brands. You have Shake Shack, Tim Hortons, Cinnabon over in Singapore already. So
Cinnabon, that's another one.
That's another.
I mean, they
I don't
smell
get it.
great right in the
Smell-
airport,
yeah.
but man,
No.
once you eat them 20 minutes later, you
stomach
are
ache.
so
Well, see, here's the airport
Sorry,
thing. The
Cinnabon.
airport used to be my excuse for the once in a while McDonald's or Wendy's, but you can't find the fast food anymore in these airports because
No.
they're all going up these high-end
really
restaurants
posh,
and everything
right?
like that. I mean, like even in Newark, which is my home base, you can't. I was in Terminal A yesterday. You can't find anything.
Hey, New Jersey boy,
fun.
don't make fun of Newark.
Exactly. Terminal A, they did
We're
a great
on
job.
that
of
team.
Terminal
Come
Yes.
on.
They did a great job
All
at
right,
Terminal
what
A.
else you got?
Okay, so lastly, Nike. They've been on this hunt for new growth revenues, right? So they think they finally found it. Bloomberg got their hands on this memo to employees, and it said that they're turning to a global push for its outdoor business. It's called All Conditions Gear. So hiking gear, things like waterproof boots, these certain jackets, zip-off skirts, day packs. China is going to be a focus for them, which is kind of interesting in that way. But it's just like a crowded area. I mean, you have Patagonia, you have
much.
North Face. Like, is this going to work for them?
I love how things are named like ACG, all conditions gear.
Yes, ACG.
It's just outside things. It's hiking boots and all that kind of stuff, right?
We had Derek Jeter and the guy who does the untucked shirts in
Oh, yes.
interviewing. I don't know if you guys had
We
them as
did-
well.
we had them
Yeah,
on.
Yes, yes.
They were fabulous.
And they were talking about entering this business, and I was looking, I was like, aren't there a million like great companies already doing this stuff? This athleisure, it just seems like such a crowded market with like really
getting
good
there.
stuff.
Yes and yes, and everybody's trying to go for like the best kind of feeling products. But I also do think when you throw a celebrity like Derek
Yeah,
Jeter,
I
like
guess.
those are brands that get noticed, whether he wears them, his friends wear them, and we shall see. But I agree with you; it's a super crowded market.
It's a lot, but more people doing the outdoor stuff, you know.
What do you wear when
hiking.
you work out?
I go to like
Not to get personal.
No, I
I'm
go
curious.
to like Gap. I go to like
Yeah.
Old Navy. I don't spend the whole like.
You don't do the Lululemon thing?
I don't do the Lululemon. No.
Yeah,
too
Alex
much.
doesn't do the Lululemon
$100 for
either.
a pair of leggings.
Is that
You're
it?
crazy.
No comment.
I was
Okay.
about to say,
I
come
do
on,
Lululemon.
Carol.
All right,
But I
was
also do buy when they're on sale. They don't go on sale a lot.
No,
but I do buy some things
But
on
you
sale.
can get it on sale.
all right, very good. That is our
you
newspaper
work out?
segment with Lisa Mateo.
Do you
What?
work out?
Oh, please, come on. During the
thought you had a
pandemic,
Peloton.
all right, we have the Peloton bike and we have the Peloton walking thing.
Yes, the treadmill.
Treadmill?
Yes.
The treadmill.
The walking thing.
walking thing.
Now my girlfriend's all into it. She's like 10,000 rides or something crazy like that, and everybody that Peloton knows her and everything. So, and during the lockdown, I did do it a lot.
Yeah, that's
and
what
then
I
when I started
thought.
commuting,
So what
I was
happened?
Like, I started commuting, and I was like, so I walked to Penn Station. That's
Okay.
Wait, what was
there you
that
go.
story? That second story you did about a tartar between a certain age?
Yes,
like these
exactly.
things.
And there you go.
There you go.
It all ties together, doesn't it? Exactly. All right, Lisa
Great
Mateo.
stuff.
Thank you very much on the newspaper stuff here.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live each weekday 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.